In this video, I'm going to discuss rolling over your 403b account to an IRA while still employed by your employer. So essentially, what is a 403b account? What is an IRA account? Why somebody would ever make the move to roll over their 403b to their IRA or to an IRA to accomplish a specific retirement goal, or at least make sure that they're setting up their retirement needs properly. So for starters, a 403b account is very similar to how a 401k account works, or a 457 plan, or a thrift savings plan. It's an employer-sponsored plan, but more set up for nonprofit organizations or state-run organizations. So it really goes by teachers, preachers, nonprofits is really the way to remember, typical individuals that have 403b plans, or certain hospitals that are run through the state. So think of this as a bucket. The way on how this bucket grows is by two sides that will make up this formula. You have one side, which is the contributions that somebody's making into their plan, and then the other side, which is the rate of return that's coming back based upon the investments that they choose. So as somebody is working for their employer or has been working for their employer for many years, they're most likely making contributions into this account. The employer, the entity, was providing some sort of match into this account. So that obviously that's adding a positive into the bucket. So that's one side. This is really the controllables of an employee being able to control how much money that they're placing aside into this account. And then obviously the higher the employer match, the more incentive it is to place those dollars up to the match. So you're ultimately getting free monies. And then this other side of the coin, which is typically overlooked, which is the rate of return side. So the rate of return side, the way and how this account grows is by the investments that this individual chooses within their 403b account. If let's say they're an aggressive investor and they're heavily weighted their portion of investments towards stocks, and the stock market went up that year or that day, well, then it'd be equivalent to someone pouring a gain into this bucket. So ultimately, when you have bullish runs in the market, the contributions that somebody's making into this account, the employer match that's being placed into this account is obviously adding positives. Then you have the power of compound interest coming back from the rate of return being positive, and you just have this bucket growing fatter and fatter and fatter. Now, the downside to this rate of return is it could be positive or it could be negative. So this is where you have bullish runs or just downward market shifts. Think of a downward market shift as somebody taking a sword and slicing this bucket. So if you have a type of recession like a 2008 recession, or what occurred during those months of the coronavirus pandemic, it was obviously a scary time. But even if you have more of just a correction, a minus 10%, that's still a loss to a portfolio. So this is where, when you're fixating on a 403b account, the good thing about a 403b account is when someone's adding contributions, and if that employer, the word if an employer is not giving a match, well, then obviously that is not as powerful as if somebody, an employer would be giving a match. But ultimately, this is the main reason why somebody would be setting their monies in a 403b account. It's kind of out of sight, out of mind. They're placing a portion of their paycheck, they're putting it aside for a retirement need later on, or for their retirement account to use later on throughout their retirement years. The downside to this, and really what's overlooked on that rate of return side, is the performance is based upon those investment options, but those investment options are limited. So on average, you might have anywhere between 10 on the low end to right around 25, possibly 30 different funds to choose from. Think of those as eggs in your basket. So why could that potentially be a problem? It could be a problem because you want to leverage your chips the right way. If somebody is eligible to take their 403b account and roll it over into an IRA, the reason why that's advantageous is you could have a lot more options. If your goal was to try to grow your bucket as large as possible, as fat as possible, well, rather than be handcuffed to those 10 to 30 different funding options that are that are restricted within the options available within a 403b account, if you roll those monies over into an IRA account, you could have over 5,000 different choices. So also you could tailor an IRA more specifically to a retirement need. If you're trying to create some sort of income strategy for, if let's say, a person is age 60, they're eligible for a 403b rollover into an IRA as an in-service, meaning that they're still going to be working for their company for, let's say, another 5 years or 3 years or 10 years. They could go and say, okay, well, if I'm going to retire at age 65 as an example, let me take a portion of all these 403b monies, make sure it's being set up into the proper income strategy and a customized IRA that's going to maximize this income. Or they want to say, okay, I want a portion of my strategy to be established for income, another portion of my strategy to be established for growth. So this is where you could set up another IRA that's established specifically for growth. It's something that could have lower cost off of these 10 to 30 different eggs. So when you have a basket of over 5,000 funds to choose from, you could have lower cost, you could have a higher quality, you could have things that are better diversified. You're not handcuffed into those 10 to 30 options. So it's just saying, okay, do you want to have thousands of different eggs in your basket to choose from, or do you want to have limitations on only a couple of dozen eggs to choose from? So that's the perspective. That's the mental perspective I want you guys to really see as the 30,000 foot view off of a 403b account versus an IRA account. So an IRA account, that formula is going to be very similar to the 403b. The only difference is with an IRA, many times when somebody rolls it over from a 403b account or a 401k account, they're not making additional contributions into that plan. Conceptually, think of the contribution as that rollover. When somebody leverages that rollover opportunity, it's going from a qualified retirement account like the 403b, these are pre-tax qualified retirement account, and then it's getting rolled over into a qualified IRA account. So it's going from a taxable account or a tax deferred account into a tax deferred account. It's not as if when they do the rollover, they have to pay taxes on that as that rollover takes place. That's the whole purpose of doing a rollover. And the reason why somebody would place it into an IRA over the 403b is because of the limitations or because the available options with an IRA, that customization that I mentioned previously. So I'm going to go through some examples on how to set this up effectively, but just be mindful if you are eligible for some sort of in-service rollover from the 403b into an IRA, or let's say you sever employment and you have this old 403b account sitting out there. How do you make sure that you're effectively rolling that over into an IRA? If let's say there's a custodian, so like as an example, you might have a 403b account through Fidelity, but then Prudential is the company that's taking over the new 403b account. So they might send you a letter, say, hey, you have these next 30 days, 60 days to take the monies out of the 403b and roll it over into an IRA of your choice. So there's certain qualification points that allow you to do this rollover, to allow this rollover to take place, and really make it advantageous for your position. So the pros on doing this 403b rollover to an IRA is just giving you different investment options, give you more investment options, more eggs in your basket to choose from. Now, the misconception with that is an individual thinks, okay, I'm placing monies into a 403b account and I'm also getting an employer match. So the person places the monies in there, and let's say if they're making $100,000 per year and they place $5,000, which is 5% of their income, and the employer is matching them 5%, which is another $5,000. This says if they place in $5,000, the employer is matching them $5,000. They have $10,000 that's being placed into their bucket every year. Even if they take their 403b monies and roll it over into an IRA, that doesn't hurt the match, because the match is only off of the contribution amount that you're placing in there. It's not off of the actual total bucket. So if somebody had $1 million 403b account and they're making $100,000 each year and they're still putting in the $5,000, they're only getting the $5,000 of the match in that example. It's not like, this number could be $1 million, it could be $10,000. That matching money is not going to be hindered when somebody's going and rolling the monies over. Because in the example, let's say if you have $1 million in your 403b account, you're eligible for an in-service rollover while you're still working for your employer, and you roll this over into an IRA account. Well, you establish an IRA. The IRA is going to have a $0 balance from day one, but when you roll the monies over into it, the balance of the 403b account will be $0, and the balance of the IRA after the rollover would be $1 million. Pretty self-explanatory. If this person is still going to work for a couple more years, or let's just say 5 more years, well, they now have an IRA account that's customized, where you can have multiple IRAs that are now channeled based upon what this person is trying to accomplish. And they could still contribute there in that example, $5,000, get the $5,000 of a match. So now they have 5 years left of their contributions of the rate of return off of the limited investment options within their 403b as this other chassis or multiple chassis within the IRA accounts, as they are working and doing the job of what would be most effective. So you have one IRA that's set up for income, one IRA that's set up for growth, one IRA that's set up for safety, one IRA that's set up as a type of legacy play or death benefit play, another IRA that's set up for Roth conversion purposes. So you could just do so much customization and a multitude of different things to really make sure to benefit your specific retirement situation, your retirement goal. So I hope that all this makes sense. Now, the problems when somebody tries to do a rollover their 403b account to an IRA while still employed is the eligibility. Sometimes they might not be eligible. It just depends upon the custodian, depends upon how that 403b plan was set up. Majority of the times, it could be 59 and a half. That would make somebody eligible to roll the monies over. And then other times they say, no, we're not going to allow you to roll it over as you're still working for the employer. You have to sever employment or you have to get deemed retired first. It means stop working for us in order to go and roll those monies over. So it really just depends upon the eligibility. Obviously, feel free to give us a call and reference this video if you need help with getting on a three-way phone call with your employer and seeing what options you have available and how to effectively leverage this sort of strategy, this sort of concept to better your retirement situation. Once again, that number is 1-800-566-1002, or you could go directly to our website and set up a calendar appointment and just reference this video so that we could have a specialist reach out to you at the time frame that works best for you. The other problem, and really the most important problem, is not having a goal when rolling over the monies. So a rollover might sound great, when I say, hey, you might have only 10 to 30 different options in this 403b account, but with the IRA, you have over 5,000 different options. You say, oh, wow, that's fantastic. Sounds great. But if you don't know how to do this effectively, how to create or set up this one IRA or multiple IRA accounts effectively, well, it doesn't, you're shooting in the dark at that point. You're not really aiming at anything. You're just saying, oh, okay, well, I hope I'm making the right choice. I hope I'm not being too aggressive or going outside of my risk tolerance or my risk capacity. So that's where we really try to tailor plans and make sure that we're showing you if you're going to make this move. First off, are you eligible to make this move? And then secondly, how to make sure that you're doing it effectively as per what your goals are. So really get finite with those details on what is your current situation, what is your current expenses, what are your what's your ideal retirement situation, what is your lifestyle going to be in retirement, what are your retirement expenses, and then really work backwards from there. So go from your current point A, which is today that you might be eligible for this rollover, roll the potential monies over into these multitude of IRA accounts that are customized to get you to that point B, which is your ideal retirement age, and then from point B until as morbid as this might sound, date of death. So you want to make sure that you're crawling before you walk, walk before you run, and understand all the different angles on how to do this effectively. Here's a couple of strategies that we use that you could also use on your own. And it's pretty simple. It's just, taking a step back and not overcomplicating things. And one of the effective methods is something known as the 3-thing scenario. So I always say that there's 3 things that every individual needs to figure out before they're retired, or if they're currently retired, how to stay retired forever. The number 1 thing is income. The number 2 thing is emergency. And then the number 3 thing is growth/inflation. So if I just go through a hypothetical example, let me clear off the screen. So let's say hypothetically, I come into a scenario where an individual is currently age 60. They review their 403b information. They call over to their custodian, to their employer, and they realize, okay, I'm going to still be working for this company, for the state as an example, for the next 5 years, but I'm eligible to take my 403b monies and roll it over into an IRA. Doesn't make sense. So after asking a slew of questions, we understand this person's 403b account is sitting at $1 million. This person wants to retire ideally at age 65. So we understand their point A is age 60. Their point B is going to be age 65. At age 65, when we look at their guaranteed cash flows, they have Social Security income coming to them at age 65 for $30,000. They might have an employer pension. which is, let's say, equivalent to $20,000. But then after doing budgeting analysis, came to the conclusion that at age 65, they need $70,000 per year of income starting at this age 65 until date of death, incorporating for inflation. So we would go to the drawing board and say, okay, let's place the smallest amount of dollars and only as much as necessary into the correct accounts that will produce some sort of cash flow to suffice this income related need. So we understand if we take 30,000 plus 20,000, that equals 50,000. We have a $70,000 need. We need the income. So if this person is no longer working when they hit age 65, we need to make sure that their income is greater than or equal to what their expenses are. So out of that, we understand that there is a $20,000 gap there. Out of the $20,000 gap, if let's say this person is 60, they're eligible for an in-service rollover. So basically a rollover to an IRA while they're still employed. We could go take a portion of these dollars. Let's say it's going to cost them 200 grand to, with the best insurance related IRA, type of longevity insurance through a form of an annuity, leveraging like a hybrid annuity, something with an income rider which doesn't make them lose control. So if you're not familiarized with annuities, or last time you've ever seen annuities, you've seen old-fashioned annuities, be mindful that annuities have changed. It's completely night and day from what the early 2000 related annuities are to today's types of annuities. Now they allow you to have control. They allow you to have maxed out cash flows, lifetime income streams to you and your spouse. So there's a lot of really neat mechanisms with there. And you could also leverage IRA monies, or you could leverage annuities into IRA accounts. So as $1 million, maybe this person rolls over the first $200,000 into IRA number one with a hybrid annuity that will give them the $20,000 of cash flow, lifetime income cash flow, starting at age 65. What this tells us is this person will receive income starting at age 65 until date of death. If let's say they pass away, early, prematurely, after only a couple of years, whatever's remaining in their account balance that they did not draw down, that will go to beneficiaries. If they keep living and living and living and they have no account balance left, well, then there's nothing that goes to beneficiaries, but the insurance company would still be on the hook to keep paying them their lifetime income every year, every day, that they keep living past that break-even point. So this is IRA number one. It only costs them, in this example, $200,000. So now we have 1 million minus 200,000 is 800 grand left over. Step number two would be the emergency need. If this person has expenses of 70,000, rule of thumb is to leave about 6 to 12 months of some sort of oh my gosh fund, an emergency fund available at your fingertips. So maybe out of the 70,000, this individual wants to leave $50,000 in IRA number two, something that's not susceptible to downward market losses, something that they could just access kind of like a checking account or savings account, but they're leveraging these qualified funds to do so. So it's going to be IRA number two with potentially a money market account, and that's going to be for $50,000. So out of the original $1 million, we had IRA number one was for 200 grand. IRA number two was for 50,000. This is suffice step one, this suffice step two, and now you have step three has over 750,000 or 750 grand in this example that they could now have as fund monies, as their ancillary accounts. So now they could really strategize on, and this is something we help them do, is strategize on what would be the best type of investment play on this. Do they absolutely hate the market? Are they risk averse? Do they want to go into more safe accumulation related accounts? Do they like to leverage fixed related accounts, bank products, insurance products? Do they like to leverage investments and really go gung-ho with the market and be a real gunslinger and say, I understand that the market's going to go up and down and ebb and flow, but anytime that the market does well one year, I'm going to take an extra vacation to Europe, or anytime the market goes down, well then I'm not going to use that as much. So what we're doing is we're customizing per their situation, rather than leaving the 750,000 in that 403b account that is left over with those 10 to 30 different eggs in their basket to choose from, those limited options. With this IRA number three, if let's say they're just comparing it with a growth strategy, you could go into low cost, ETFs, low cost, mutual, no load mutual funds, different things that could give you higher quality, lower cost than anything in that, 403b account if it's possible. So, you're ultimately, and I know it looks like a lot of chicken scratch on the screen, but ultimately what did we do? We took $1 million of a 403b account that the person wasn't really sure how to properly retire, created a plan for them. We didn't just say, okay, this is a portfolio. This is just a bucket of money that's sitting there and it's susceptible to different investments. What we did is we said, okay, what is the correct income strategy that we have to accomplish? We put not a dollar, we basically put the smallest amount of dollars and only as much as necessary with that IRA number one for income. That was 200,000, not a dollar less, not a dollar more. Step number two was for that emergency need. So this was IRA number two, was in the money market account. Then step number three was growth. And let's just say if they leveraged different investments and they had 750,000 left over, that maybe they leverage, like a Charles Schwab, IRA account or different things that allow them to customize those options, effectively. So, these three things scenario is just making sure that you're not over leveraging one area over the other. So like, as an example, you're not going to want to use a growth strategy for an income related need, just like you're not going to want to use an income related account for a growth related need, or you don't want to leverage an emergency related account for an income and a growth related need. So is all about maximizing your chips the correct way. A further step to this three things scenario is something that I coined the term the Reef Method. So the R in Reef stands for risk. So this is more for that step three bucket, really the growth / inflationary need bucket, is figuring out what this person's risk tolerance is. And this is something where we use some artificial intelligence software to really pinpoint what is this individual's risk score. To say, okay, if let's say their risk score comes back at a 10 and they're very risk averse, well, if the risk score of, let's say, the S&P 500, the market is of a 75, why would they be heavily invested in the market if their actual mindset is saying, I'm super risk averse? Why would they risk more money than what they really feel is right? So this risk score is going to be specific to each individual. All because somebody's 65 or 60 years old doesn't mean that they have to have the standard risk score. Each individual is going to be different, or how they feel about the markets. They feel like the market's going to be bullish versus the market's going to be bearish. All these different things come into play. Recency bias comes into play. So we want to see what their risk tolerance is, pinpoint what that risk tolerance is, and more importantly, what their risk capacity is to see how much risk they could actually bring on. The next is the E stands for eggs. What is their, what are the current eggs in their basket to choose from, or what is their current eggs that they have chosen as per their allocation? If let's say they're in a very aggressive portfolio and their risk score off of that portfolio once again is a 70, but their risk score is a 15, well then there's a large variance there. That's obviously not a good thing. We look underneath the hood and we examine a little bit further and we say, okay, well, what are some opportunities there to make sure that you're still able to get a decent rate of return, but scale down this risk measurement towards that risk tolerance of, in this example, a score of a 15 or score of a 20, whatever that individual scores. So any way to really pull back these reins, maybe that means further diversification, further safe accumulation accounts, further fixed accounts, or more cash related accounts, something that will really reduce the amount of risk for that individual. And then the F in the Reef Method is for fees. One of the things that's constantly overlooked is the costs that somebody has when they're leveraging just a basic mutual fund, or they're utilizing a financial advisory group that is charging them, an arm and a leg. They're charging, 1.5% as an example, where, that should be reduced down to 0.5% or 0.25%. Or, instead of being in funds that are, 1.5% of expense ratios with different mutual funds, maybe they could trim that down to, 70 basis points, 0.7%. and still have that impact of a diversified portfolio that's being maximized. So all of these little nuances, they come into play. So that's where, we try to at least put things into perspective. And I like to use these really, neat acronyms, or really, easy to remember acronyms, so that it just, it allows you to not be tripped up with confusing terminology or super scared to not make a decision. The confused mind makes no decision, and that's where you just want to be very careful with how you're setting up everything, and you want to make sure that there is an actual plan that's in place. And that's how we help individuals on a daily basis when they're calling into the agency, when they're setting up these different appointments, as we want to make sure that everything is very methodical so that they know that all these different angles are covered. And this is why we recently trademarked a process that's known as the Retirement Diet Plan, and it tries to cover, it takes the key areas of financial planning and it optimizes it in any market environment. So if let's say the markets are doing well, fantastic, you're satisfied. If the markets go down, That's fantastic. There's an actual solution that's set up in case of that downward market loss occurs. Or if the markets are going sideways, it's ebbing and flowing, how to make sure that, that's being covered properly. So that's what the diet plan does. The D in the diet stands for distribution. The I stands for investment. The E stands for estate or legacy planning, and then the T stands for tax planning. So, it breaks down a lot of these, the three things scenario, the Reef method, but it gets it into more technical data so that we're able to see the math and science behind everything rather than just, shooting from the hip. So hoping, oh yeah, just put it in there and, everything will work itself out. We want to be very measured with the approach. So I hope that all that makes sense. If you found value in this video, feel free to give us a call on our 1-800 number. It is 1-800-566-1002. You can give us a call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Somebody will answer your phone and set up an appointment with a specialist. Just reference this video. Also, an easier way for you to go and review our company or review and download different reports is to visit our website. The URL is going to be in the description of this video. It's afossefinancial.com, or you could type in retiresharp.com. You instantly have a calendar that will pop up in there. You set that up. You could obviously review it, review the process, review how the situation works. Because of this post-COVID era, we like to do either, some screen shares, just some phone appointments, some different videos. We send you literature. So it's really whatever you feel most comfortable with, making sure that you're tackling your needs and you could do it from the comfort of your own home. So, once again, if you found value in this video, feel free to, give us a call, set up an appointment. We'll make sure to designate a specialist to speak with you. And then also make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Retire Sharp, so you can have access to the most updated videos. I want to make sure to update these videos every week. I do a couple of videos each week just to make sure that, education is key with retirement planning. And, the more educated you are, the more comfortable, the more confident you will feel with your plan. And, I hope you really found value in this. But, thanks so much, guys, and reach out to us if you need anything.